So my passage that I did my exegesis on was Isaiah 58. And let me just say, like, I love exegesis, and you just get to look into different passages that you might not really look into, and then you can just find, go in depth, and just find so much nuggets of wisdom, and it's just so exciting. And I'm here to show you some of the nuggets of wisdom that I found, and it's just really cool. Alright, so first off, just to get a little background information of Isaiah 58, is that it takes place while the Israelites are in exile in Babylon. So if you're away from your home, that would be difficult, and sometimes Israel would be in exile for years and years, just waiting and waiting to return to their homeland. And this is a result of just how Israel was always just disobedient to God, and then God would be like try to whip them back into shape, and they would be faithful, and then it was just a constant battle of faithfulness and unfaithfulness. And this is not something that the Israelites were not used to. Then in the passage itself, the prophet Isaiah says, "Shout out, don't hold back, lift your voice up like a trumpet," which is God basically saying, like, hey, this is a matter of life or death, and you need to be listen up, trying to get their attention. So then in verse 2 it talks about how Israel is doing all the right things, all the right piety things. There's things of like how day after day they would seek God, know their ways, they practice righteousness, did not forsake the ordinance of God, and that they ask of righteous judgments. So these are all good things. But then in verse 3 it says, you serve your own interest on your fast day, and you oppress all your workers, and they do all these bad things that are not pleasing to God, to the point where God's like, I'm not going to listen to you because you're doing it with the wrong heart. You just want your own blessings for all this religious actions that you are doing, and it's not okay. And then there's, in verse 5 it says, like, is this acceptable in the sense of fasting when mourning? So fasting would take place in the context of mourning often, or to have a divine experience with God. And there's more reasons to fast too, but those are the two reasons why in this context would be the best time to fast, is because they're mourning of the loss of their homeland, and then two, if someone who is religious wants to have an encounter with the divine, they would obviously fast and prep their bodies spiritually for that, but they're only seeking their benefits. And then, so in mourning, they would often wear sackcloth and ashes to signify the mourning. And then God says that this is what he would prefer the Israelites to do, which is to take care of the poor, which is like the hallmark of the whole Bible and who God is. And there's some quotes that I would like to read. It says, no amount of self-mortification can suffice as an action pleasing to God, since it stems from all the wrong motivations. In essence, a pursuit of one's own affairs, completely serving an orientation. And so then though the piety of Israel were fasting and thought it would please God, it was just within their heart they were doing the wrong thing, and that wasn't pleasing to God. But instead, if they wanted to deprive themselves for the sake of, then he said, do it for the sake of the oppressed, the needy, and the helpless, and not for their own religious, but just to give themselves away. Like, those people won't be able to repay the Israelites, and that's the same thing that God does for them. His continual blessings, and God wants them to reflect him. And God is always faithful through these times, and he's urging them to obey them. And sometimes, like, I don't know, God is always faithful, and you can be through tough times, but if you don't obey God, you won't inherit the blessing. where God was, or he didn't seem like they would actually listen. God was actually listening to them, but it's evident through this passage that God is listening always as he's coming to correct them. But in order to inherit the blessing, they must obey God in his commands. And that is evident through the if and then statements in the text. And yeah, that's my passage, and it's very relevant today with everything going on. So it's a cool passage.